Hello everyone. Today I'm gonna be featuring a ship that has come up in conversation a lot lately, and that is of course the Moskva. The reason why it's coming up in discussions a lot lately is because this heavy cruiser is becoming a special ship. I'd call it a premium, but honestly only tier 1 to tier 9s are premiums. The tier 10 ships are special, they have a bit of a different symbol and so forth, but whatever, premium special. Kind of the same thing, but not quite in terms of money gain and so forth. Regardless, the point is this ship is being moved into a resource ship, which means that you can no longer just grind for it like any other ship once that happens, and in return the Soviet cruiser line will be split into two new lines. The heavy cruiser line, where the new tier 10 will be the Petropavlovsk, and the light cruiser line, where the new tier 10 will be the Alexander Nevsky. So the reason why this Moskva commentary is very relevant is, of course, people are trying to decide, do they want to grind this thing? Do they want to grind it before it becomes a coal ship or something similar and will be much harder to obtain? Well, in my opinion, the Moskva is still a great ship. The Moskva is a strong ship, and in the current meta it actually works quite well. It has issues, but, well, I wouldn't say issues, it has weaknesses and it has a set of strengths. Most importantly, the strength of the Moskva is absolutely the guns. The AP penetration on the guns is tremendous. You can citadel battleships at mid-ranges, you can citadel cruisers at max range, quite easily in fact. The legendary module, the details on that, we don't really know what's going to happen with the legendary module. Is it going to become a part of the ship once it gets removed, or what are their plans? But especially with the legendary module, as I'm running right here on the Moskva, the dispersion on these guns is very juicy indeed, and the performance of the ship at basically all ranges is very good. The combination of the great dispersion, the great shell velocity, and overall good AP damage means that AP is very powerful. The HE is okay, it's better than Stalingrad's. You can actually deal damage to angle targets fairly well with the HE, but obviously in general in the Moskva you want to be shooting mostly AP, because if you can catch those broadsides you can do a lot of damage. I'm trying to get my teammates here to push a bit. I have a Vladivostok that's reversing away, which is obviously not optimal. So shell velocity is great, range is great, DPM is pretty You're not really one of the high DPM cruisers. You make up for that with having range and a lot of utility, but in terms of raw DPM, you're not really going to be able to outmatch too many. What you, however, can most likely do is outlast them. The concealment on the ship is trash. In fact, if you look at the minimap, you can see that my concealment is 14.1. I'm using the smoke in front of me, but even with the smoke funk penalty was something like 12.7. Don't quote me on that, but smoke funk penalty was very high, but because the enemy team is so far away because of my radar, I was able to use that smoke to deal some damage from behind the island. Concealment is trash. The handling is very poor. It turns like a battleship. But unlike a battleship, it's got a gigantic citadel with honestly pretty damn thin armor on the broadside. The Moskva does not like being broadside to any targets. It's one of the juiciest targets to shoot at with a battleship, because there's just so much citadel to hit. If you catch the Moskva in a brawl in a cruiser, you will probably come out on top, unless you really misplay. The Moskva does not handle brawling well because the gigantic citadel, the fairly long reload times, it doesn't have any improved AP pen angles like, for example, the Stalingrad or something like a Des Moines. So you need flat surfaces to be able to punish them. It doesn't have any torpedoes, and most importantly, if you get broadside on this thing in basically any ship, you will be citadeling it. Even in the Kleber, I've often annihilated Moskvas just by getting close enough that I can pen the citadel, and once I can pen the citadel, the Moskva DPM just isn't enough to match me, and I can even gun him down in that. So, obvious short-range weaknesses. Long range though, a lot of armor. 50mm plating, which means that you can push into a lot of ships that most other cruisers could not. Zhao, for example, here, his HE is gonna, well, he can pin my superstructure in my nose, but the rest of the plating is gonna be shattering his HE. the battleships, they can also pen my upper nose, but the rest of the AP is gonna be shattering unless they can arm on the superstructure. In general, in fact, Moskvas tend to get tankier as the game goes on, and your nose and superstructure gets saturated, and you end up taking very little damage as long as you maintain your angling. So the Moskva is absolutely a mid to long range specialist. It doesn't have DPM, but it does have that excellent shell velocity. It can hit targets all over the map, and it has both good AP and good HE. And of course, thanks to the shell velocity, as I mentioned, you also have an easy time hitting targets across the map. Combined with the tankiness and the radar utility, you can push in, and you can honestly, you can be an aggressive cruiser in situations many other cruisers could not. Simply because it's hard to deal with the Moskva pushing in. If you get broadside, very easy. If you can't get a broadside, well, there are situations where the Moskva struggles. Especially, for example, Henry with IFHE. He can pen your 50mm plating. He can become a big issue. In fact, Henry was often used as a counter to Stalingrad, works just as well against the Moskva. Venezia is also an issue because he's got that 54mm sap penetration, which means Moskva, even though it has a lot of armor, is also a very big ship, so you present a very big target. And of course, finally, the Hindenburg with that German special pen can pen 50mm. So if you're trying to push a flank with Hinden, Henry, Venezia, there are some others like Azuma and Yoshino, which can also be annoying because they can also pen you and they hit you very hard indeed. And of course, obvious things like Conquer. If these are on a flank, then obviously a push will become much harder because you don't have the tankiness. But this is in no way unique to the Moskva. This is something a lot of battleships also share. That's just the way it is. You can't some ships are hard to push into. But if these are not present, and even if they are present, you are still a rough force to deal with. A Moskva on a flank can be brutally effective. The reason for this is, of course, these super velocity guns, as well as the AP. You can't really give broadside to a Moskva. Even battleships will hesitate. Even if you're not getting citadels, you will still be doing a lot of AP damage. And unlike the Venezia, unlike the Stalingrad, as you can see in this example, if a ship tries to angle against you, you can still switch to HE. And you do fairly good, consistent damage because your dispersion is so good, your shell velocity is so good, you're consistently landing a lot of shells regardless of the distance, so even your HE pressure can be quite significant. Moskva is not an easy ship to play though. In fact, I would say it's probably one of the most misplayed ships in the game. People struggle with the concept of a cruiser that can be played both as a tanky nosing ship as well as a ship on the move. And trying to use the radar on a ship with 14k concealment is also something you often see Moskvas overextend and get farmed down before they can disengage, or you see Moskvas make the cardinal mistake of just giving too much broadside, not respecting the size of that citadel and the weakness of the armor. So pushing in while maintaining the angling, of course, means that you have to have a fair bit of map awareness, because good positioning is key. In this game, I've kind of helped push in this flank. The problem is the enemy has the cap advantage, and they do have a significant point advantage of 140 points. So, seeing as my team is mostly pushing into their spawn, I'm instead going to try to push towards the B objective, and there you can see the power of that AP. The pen, the dispersion, the shell velocity. Even a fast ship like the Bayard gets caught out. Not quite the devastating I hoped for. And he's actually fast enough to dodge the follow-up volley and someone else gets the kill. Regardless, we get a lot of kills in quick succession, which is exactly what we need. Daring caught in the open. I assume he's going to reverse, so I shoot behind him, but he actually chooses to accelerate, which is surprising because now he's accelerating towards my team. He's got a broken engine as well. I have my radar ready. The 12km radar is very effective. He jukes me again by stopping. Stopping while spotted in the open is dangerous, in a daring especially, because you don't build up speed very quickly. And now my entire team will start wailing on him, and that is indeed a very dead and very unaware daring. He gets killed by the Minotaur, and at this point this is looking like a certain win. But of course, in World of Warships, there is no such thing as a certain win. I catch the Richelieu, I use expert loader, switch to AP. I did mention, if you get broadsides in this thing, the AP can be extremely rewarding, even on ships that you can't citadel, like for example the Richelieu. He angles out a fair bit, so it mitigates some of my AP, but I'm still gonna stick with the AP and still gonna try to punish him with it, because the damage potential of AP is just so much more significant than the HE. He turns to dodge the torpedoes, mitigates it again a bit. Sovietsky Soyuz is pushing in, but whereas most cruisers would be afraid, I don't really care. Moskva doesn't care. Neither of these are big HE threats, so they're more of these strong AP ships, and angled in, I can easily push into both of them. This is what makes the Moskva unique, and this is why Moskva on the flank can be such a frustrating experience to deal with. When a cruiser just can sit nose in and farm you and force you to switch to HE, it's hard to deal with. I haven't really gotten the volleys I would like on the Richelieu. I'm trying to aim for his upper belt. He keeps changing course. Surprisingly still giving a broadside, so I'm just gonna keep farming him. Start with one target, then work on the next one. He's actually turning in fully towards me now by the looks of it, which is something he should have probably done a while earlier, but it does not matter. I switch to HE, and we're gonna try to focus him down. Note that I am reversing mid-range. That's where you want to stay. You don't want to get into brawls, you don't want to get into those super close range fights. That is not where the Moskva shines. That is not your strength. Your strength is mid and long. And every time I see a Moskva brawl, I feel sad for him, because usually it's going to end very, very poorly indeed. Kurfürst takes down the Richelieu, and once again, you would think that, well, this is a pretty easy win. Salem actually takes down my Shimakaze, and suddenly it's a 6 versus 4. And remember that my Vladivostok and Massachusetts are still sailing around in their spawn. I get a good volley in on the Salem though, using that AP. He's still giving me too much broadside. He's 15 kilometers away, but even then my shell travel time is what, 6 seconds? So very fast shells, and so very powerful shells as well. He does duck behind the island, so I switch to the Sovietsky Soyuz. And in this case, I'm gonna try to use this Minotaur smoke to my advantage to once again deal more damage without taking any damage. Another mistake people also make, one of the most common misplays in the Moskva, is thinking that because you have armor and because you have tankiness, you should be tanking all the time. So they push into situations where they eat a lot of unnecessary damage for absolutely no reason, and then like trade. And they never need to do that. There is no need for you to eat damage. It's like, if you can avoid damage, that's always the better choice. In this case, there's absolutely no need to take it. Montana gets a fantastic devastating strike in. His blast shot before dying was a blind shot into the smoke, and Minotaur gave too much broadside and gets deleted. Sovietsky Soyuz remains, my Kurfürst is running, and my Vladivostok and Massachusetts is now pushing in though. So at this point I'm starting to feel pretty confident that this will probably be a win. The reason I'm so skeptical of any potential wins these days is because, well, I've seen so many incredible throws, especially during, well, ever since the last basically year of gameplay. I've seen such incredible games that I only believe that the game is won when we have 1,000 points. And even then, it might not be certain. Soyuz angles in, I shoot still a bit of AP because I think his superstructure is unsaturated. So I'm aiming for those high penetrations. I get 4 bounces though. I'm feeling a bit hesitant and I decide, no, it's time to switch to that HE. None of the, besides the AP on the cruisers, none of the volleys might have seemed that special or that incredible. But Moskva is just very consistent. It's very good at grinding down your foes, grinding down the ships while being so hard to deal with. In this case, we're approaching 200,000 damage, and it hasn't looked like a monster game. It hasn't even felt like a monster game. It's just been calm, pushing in, aggressive play. Well, not aggressive play, but methodical play. You push in with your team, but you always try to get yourself in a position where you can harass broadsides. In this case, we're down to 4 versus 3, but the Sovietsky Soyuz, he gets 1 good volley in on me. You see he hit my superstructure, armed on the superstructure on the nose, got a lot of penetration damage, but honestly, the closer to get, and the more he has to shoot your upper belt, the less damage he deals. In that case, he only dealt 6k damage, and considering his reload is 30 seconds, that kind of DPM doesn't exactly scare you in the Moskva. In this case, I'm pushing in only because my Vladivostok is also pushing in, and I need to prevent him from getting a ram off, because I'm almost certain that's what he's doing. I switch to AP, aim for the upper belt, and I do kill him before he can get a ram off on the Vladivostok. Salem pushes out, I lose vision, instantly pop radar to catch him as well. Should be a devastating... Once again, just like with the Bayard, I can't quite get the kill. Readjusting the aim a bit higher, so before anyone else takes the kill, and I take down the Salem as well. Note that things like the Moin and Salem can be very rough if you're stuck in a 1 versus 1 and they just decide to go nose in. When they go nose in, it becomes a DPM trade, and Moskva's strengths does not lie in DPM. Moskva's weaknesses are carriers in general, especially because you like to position close to islands. You like to use island cover to protect your huge flat broadside. So carriers are always going to be an issue, especially because your AA is pretty poor. In fact, in this game I'm running defensive AA, but I've switched away from defensive AA to Hydra, because defensive AA is, well, it's a joke these days, isn't it? It doesn't really do much. And so the carrier is an obvious weakness. Any sort of brawling fights and our weakness, and trying to push into any sort of 50mm penetrating HE is rough. Because the ship is huge, clumsy, poor concealment, can be farmed. However, a Moskva played well can be a terrifying threat. That range, just look at the minimap, look at the circle on the minimap, 21 kilometers in range. In the position I am right now, I can shoot basically every part of the map in a cruiser. That is effectiveness. That is map covering effectiveness. That is any ship you can shoot, any broadsides you can use AP on, any other ships you can shoot HE on. That shell velocity as well, 7.6 second travel time. That's a DD that's 15 kilometers away. I'm still able to hit him. That is the power of the shell velocity. Oh, it turns out just as I shoot, but we should be able to adjust our aim. Is anyone else gonna take him? No. That's really what puts the Moskva, puts it apart from all the other cruisers. The gun performance is stellar. I would say it's amazing, but it's not quite up to Stalingrad's gun performance, which is of course in a class of its own. This game, this slow methodical game, I like this one because at no point was I under any threat. At no point was my ship under any risk at all. This was a very methodical, strategical game. Slow, steady wins the race in the Moskva. You try to rush in, you're probably gonna end poorly. You get caught in a crossfire, probably gonna end poorly. You sit too far back, well then you can't get those juicy citadels either. So Moskva is not an easy ship to play. It's not a cruiser for everyone. And it's not really a cruiser that you can sail off on your own with, because if you end up in straight up 1 versus 1s, there are several ships that can take you on. But you're not supposed to be doing 1 versus 1 in the Moskva. You're supposed to be part of the team. Maybe a bit apart from the team, but still part of the team where your firepower and your radar especially can provide most of its use. 210k damage, not anything special in that sense. Confederate high caliber still. Team score wise, we ended up with 2.4k. A pretty solid base. Obviously, any games with carriers can be both a blessing and a weakness. The reason I say it can be a blessing is because thanks to these shells and all the spotting that a carrier provides, you can actually, well, you can use it to farm a ton of the damage because they give you spotting on ships you might not otherwise see, especially cruisers, and thanks with this AP and the shell velocity, you can punish these cruisers utilizing that spotting. Detail report wise, 1.2 million potential, but we still ended the game extremely healthy. 71,000 damage taken. Well, we did eat some big AP damage at the start, but as I mentioned, the damage tends to fall off the longer a game goes on. We mostly shot AP, but obviously still a good sprinkling of HE mixed in, because the HE is still useful, and that's really what sets it apart from the Stalingrad, is how often you want to switch to HE and how much better the HE DPM is. Do I think the Moskva is a recommended ship? I think it's a fun ship. It plays completely different from basically any other cruiser in the game. Well, exception being Stalingrad, which has a similar playstyle, but even the Stalingrad does not have some of the things that the Moskva does, and of course vice versa. I do think the Stalingrad is a better ship, because the AP on it is just so ridiculous, but if you like big guns on a cruiser type of platform, then there's really no reason not to go for the Moskva before they remove it. Anyway, let me show you guys my recommended build. Right, as usual, I will start with the modules. Consumable wise, you should be running premium damage con premium heal and premium radar. The hydro is useful, in fact it's more useful than the defensive AA, mostly because the defensive AA is so useless these days. It has been nerfed to the ground. But still, the hydro is probably your least important consumable, for the simple reason that, well, DDs don't really want to come closer than 12 kilometers because of your radar and those terrifying guns, and you should be able to zone them out. So there are very few cases where you need hydro. Still, of course, still if you got the money, run premium all consumables. Upgrade wise, I do like turret survival. You do a lot of nose in tanking in this ship, which of course means that your turrets tend to get a fairly large beating during the match. Radar duration. Most of the time you get full utility out of your radar, because if you catch a DD at 9 kilometers, it's gonna take him a long time to leave that range. Better dispersion on the guns. In the past I liked the AA guns mod, but Wargaming has made it into complete trash, like, well, most AA things. So these days I just run aiming systems. The main battery mod could be a thing, but honestly you do so much mid to long range gameplay that better dispersion just synergizes far better. Faster rudder shift, because when you do need to turn this incredibly large and long cruiser around, then rudder shift can be quite useful. And if you're open water gunboating, it's also quite handy. Concealment, finally, so you're not spotted from the moon, even worse than you already are. And the legendary module. If the legendary module, of course, gives you main battery range and better dispersion, both things that go very well with the ship itself. If you don't have the legendary, then just go for faster reload. Better DPM is always good and more important than range, because your base range is already so useful. Captain wise, if you have Nikolai Kuznetsov, he's obviously the best Soviet captain to use, especially because the build I'm using can be used on the Stalingrad, it can be used on the Kremlin, it can be used on the, what's it called, the tier 9 Kronstadt. It can be used on all of them quite well. So we start with priority target, adrenaline rush, a superintendent, concealment expert. Now I actually really like fire prevention, mostly because you have so much health pool. And note that because of your armor, I haven't really showcased the armor, because of your armor you are so resistant to HE penetration damage that fires tend to deal a lot of damage to the Moskva. So fire prevention, making this entire sector one big fire instead of two separate fires, has limited the incoming damage a fair bit, especially these days in the age of Smolensk. And of course, because many ships will be shooting HE at a Moskva, because they know that AP generally doesn't deal too much damage. Note, this is that incredible 50mm nose, which allows you to push into battleships, and including 50mm upper belt and deck armor means that an angled profile is rough to deal damage to. Battleships have to hit the upper nose, or they have to hit the superstructure and hope to get shell arms on it. So, fire prevention I really like. Expert loader, very important, because you use both HE and AP kinda equally much. Better turret traverse, and finally Jack of all trades. If it's Kuznetsov, then you of course get the improved Jack of all trades. Kuznetsov is of course incredibly good on the ship, simply because it keeps you alive when you should die, thanks to Will to Victory, which is the best perk or best talent in the game by far, especially on a ship that tends to be chipped down slowly. Well, as long as you don't get YOLO'd, struck by a carrier, or you give too much broadside to someone. Flag wise, the healing flag is very important, reduction in fire, very important, both to increase your survivability. Speed can be quite useful because the ship is actually pretty fast, it's 36 knots. Faster consumable usage, fire chance, and AA flags. I run the detonation flag mostly because, well, I want to make commentaries, so I don't want my game ruined by RNG. But in general, cruisers don't detonate nearly as much as DDs, so not really necessary. That's pretty much the end of the Moskva commentary. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I do think this is a good ship. I actually have no idea what is my performance on the Moskva. I think I might actually be struggling a bit on the win rate on the Moskva these days because we have had so many weekend experiences. Let me double check that. Where's the Moskva? Did I go past it? There we go. Yeah, oof. See, that's pretty rough. Good average damage, but sometimes very hard to turn it into a win. And that is of course where the Stalingrad is far superior, because the Stalingrad can pump out even more damage, and more importantly, that devastating firepower also turns it into easier wins. I still don't think it's quite as effective as some other cruisers, but Moskva has its place, especially if you can't afford the Stalingrad. These guns are fairly unique. That 985 meter per second shell velocity and the pretty good fire chance in general means that it's a cruiser that can harass ships across the map. And that's not something you see too often, except with the Smolensk. Whoops. Anyways, I'll talk to you guys later. I hope you guys enjoyed this commentary. See you guys next time, and if you feel like dropping a sub, I do appreciate it.